Aisha Malik, who is currently an assistant professor at the Center of Excellence in Gender Studies at Quaid-i-Azam University. She obtained a PhD in 2010 from the University of Cambridge, specializing in gender and social policy. And she also has an MPhil in development studies from the same university. Her doctoral research centered on the subjecthood and agency of British Pakistani Muslim women and highlighted the complexity that both face of the complexity of both in the face of straightforward expositions based on binary divides within the theory. Her latest research extended these theoretical formulations to men and saw how gender, class, ethnicity, religion, and location interact to form a male subject. She has presented her work at numerous conferences, workshops, and guest speaker lectures. She won a research fellowship with South Asian Network to Address Masculinities, sponsored by Save the Children, Sweden, and worked on the research project titled Masculinities of Men in Transnational Marriages. This research has subsequently been published as a book chapter. So her research interests span gender, religion, identity, masculinity, diasporas, migration, and social policy. I'm very pleased to invite Aisha to present her paper on women's economic empowerment, sans labor rights, inadvertent oversight, or tacit omission. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Madam Chair. First, I must protest against this really masculine piece of furniture that has been given to us in most conferences because we are not visible. I really need to stand on something to be seen, and I want to be seen as well as heard. That is very important for me. So I must protest against this furniture and those tables and chairs that are basically made for men or maybe European women. They forget that Asian women are petite and strong and loud, so we need smaller furniture. Anyway, as you've already heard the title of my paper, which talks about women's economic empowerment, and which tries to protest against the absence of the mention of labor rights in this entire debate. And for this particular paper, I actually did a kind of a review, or I was looking through all the literature that has been produced by various development agencies and researchers and consultants and various reports on empowerment in general and economic empowerment in specific, to try to find out if there was any mention of labor rights, or did we talk about labor rights, or did we talk about economic empowerment. But this is what I'm going to look at, that what I found. In recent years, women's development through empowerment has been given a central place in development discourse and policy initiatives. We cannot deny that. It actually heralds a very important shift in development policy from the idea that women in developing countries are victims of underdevelopment to their recognitions as agents of change. But then what is empowerment? How is it achieved? And most importantly, for almost all developing agencies, or actors in development, it is important to know that when after it has been achieved, you need to measure it, that has it been achieved or not. All these are very important questions that require an unambiguous conceptualization of the notion of empowerment. What is empowerment? Followed by equally reliable measures to assess whether those particular women that were the target audience of these empowerment programs have been empowered or not. Feminist insights have found their way into these gender and development debates, and over the years we have seen some very good, remarkable studies produced, and some of which I actually studied for this particular paper. For example, in 2011, Rubina Sehgal produced a paper, a research study on this. Naila Kabir has written about it. There's a very recent one by Yasmin Zedi, and almost all of these research studies on empowerment of women were funded by development agencies like USAID, IDRC, DFID, and UN Women. These studies have sort of expanded our understanding of empowerment, right? For example, there's a whole lot of debate on whether empowerment is a process or a product, or whether it has an instrumental value, or whether it has these intrinsic values, or what's the role of agency in empowerment, how do you, relate empowerment to alleviation of poverty, those kind of things. And they have also highlighted the challenges and barriers to achieving it. Where economic empowerment is strongly linked to waged labor. Almost all studies have some in passing and some very strongly alluded to the issue of weak enforcement of labor laws and rampant abrogation of labor rights of workers in general and women in particular. But the uptake of such studies by the actors involved in the practice of development, whether international or national, has, however, been devoid of this vital aspect of economic empowerment. In fact, two things are very obvious from the empowerment literature in the field of development itself, which I'm going to mention right from the beginning. Number one, economic empowerment is understood as, these are the only two terms that I found they use, economic opportunities made available to women and the extent of their participation in such activities. There was no discussion of economic empowerment or measurement of this kind of achievement of economic empowerment through the quality of the waged work that is made available to women. When they speak of rights, generally, the section of rights is delegated to political rights, which are measured in women's parliamentary participation, women's voting activity, and women's role in decision-making in the private or the public sphere. So there's a disconnect between the rights and economic empowerment. Number two, in almost all studies, the onus of economic empowerment is always on women, which means that women need to empower themselves. And hence, it's largely the center of it. For example, statements like this, quote, women are capable of empowering themselves, while actors can only provide supportive environments. And the discussion of these supportive environments largely includes, for example, which is also important, I'm not saying it's not important, for example, like saying that, women should have a harassment-free work environment, women should be given protection inside their houses and outside their houses. But this supportive environment also includes labor laws and upholding of these labor rights, which is the weakest area in this particular ambit of the supportive environment. Generally, reports had this kind of obligatory paragraph or two paragraphs on labor rights, but again the entire centrality of the empowerment debate is you define it, then you have these policy measures to achieve it, and then you have these measures to measure it, indices to measure it, whether it has been achieved or not. And every time when we come out with the result of these 4 indices, which say that women have not been economically or otherwise empowered, we go back to redefining empowerment, rather than making the link between labor rights and empowerment. Now, at the beginning of my paper, I must actually make this clear that I'm not a legal expert, so I cannot tell you about labor rights. Neither am I a kind of an activist. I'm just an academic who's gone through this kind of literature. So I would, and most of the people I understand are students here, so I would like to begin by actually rephrasing what do we mean by development. If it has this kind of centrality for development itself, then what do we mean by development? Now, to begin with, development itself is a very contested concept, and it has been acknowledged time and again. It started off as a means of improving the economies of developing countries, and then later evolved into a broader concept of human development. In this entire history of human development, almost, after the first decade, women came to be seen as almost as important as men. In fact, most of the countries' development is measured by how women are performing on various statistics nowadays. And hence, if women are not participating in, let's say, the economy or in the social or the political processes, then, that country's progress is considered to be stagnant, which means that they are not developing or improving. This realization of the importance of women, like the evolution of the concept of development itself, has taken many forms and meanings over the years. Initially, for example, women were just seen within their caring and the motherhood roles, and they were targeted only as vulnerable groups, which were the recipients of the development aid. That watershed moment supposedly was the Esther Mother's book, which was women's role in economic development, and it kind of changed the development discourse in favor of women's active participation in economic processes. Now I'll come back to this later. What do they mean by economic participation? Now, ever since women have come to be seen as an active participants in development, policy prescriptions have also seen this kind of gradual shift in their orientation. Welfare-based policies that cater to women's motherhood role gave it to the equity-based policies that try to satisfy women's strategic needs by passing laws that would protect women's rights within the constitution. Then came the anti-poverty that you really needed to help poor women in the third world countries to look after their practical needs of roti, kapda and makan. The era of globalized economies, which still continues, ushered in efficiency-centered policy interventions that sought to capitalize on women's labor and its benefit for developing countries, leading to a feminization of labor workforce in many developing countries. And I keep on telling this capitalization of labor as a teacher of development studies. Whenever we have this entrance exam, we put in this question, where do you see women's role in the development of Pakistan? And almost always the first sentence is 50% population of Pakistan is women, and they're not working, and if they work, so I keep on telling them that if the 50% is not working, how come the other 50% gets to work? So it's such an insult to women being told that they're not working. 50% are doing nothing, as if they're just existing, breathing air every day, inhaling and exhaling. So it's like not anything more than. So now, when we move from this, when these came, and those efficiency-based policies are still under, effect, development agencies are still using them. The term has sort of evolved into the empowerment-based development interventions, and somehow it is thought that they have come in with a rethink of the development itself, asking for a more relational analysis of gender inequality at all levels, be it the household, be it the market, or be it the state. Empowerment of women in this frame then is thought to have far-reaching implications for social, economic and political rights of women. Right? And then most of the reports go into this elaborate discussion of what is empowerment by saying that empowerment is somehow an achievable thing. This particular policy measure of empowerment, because there's a lot of debate on people saying that empowerment is an elusive goal. They're saying, no, this is not elusive, it's achievable. And it is very important because somehow empowerment is not an end in itself, but is also a means to achieving other rights, and hence women should be empowered. And that it has an intrinsic value as well as an instrumental value. It would help us to achieve the feminist ideals as well as somehow achieve those benchmarks that our country needs to achieve in terms of improving its economics and its political rights and other indicators. Now, if they have, and there's this huge debate on what actually they mean by empowerment, then they come up with these ideas that, since we are making these policies, we need to find out whether we have achieved them or not. So they try to map them through these broad-based indicators. And prime among them are like gender gap index, gender inequality index, gender-related development index, which are GDI on all these indices. Now, these indices reflect the situation of women on the basis of large-scale, objectively observed and classified data, thereby allowing generalizations for policy purposes. The entire is that you want to define the problem because you need to find a way of working the solution also. And an improvement in these indicators, macro-based indicators, is supposed to better the lives of women, thereby empowering them. Development agenda, whether national or international, has been driven by this aim. South Asian countries have incorporated this line of action. You keep on hearing about how women will be empowered again and again in some of these policy debates. Some of them have been more successful in the others countries, in South Asia, for example, or the developing countries, but a few, unfortunately, have performed really dismally. So, for example, I can begin with the Global Gender Gap Report, which is presented by World Economic Forum. The last one came out in 2015, the next one is awaited. And they tend to examine the gap between men and women in 4 fundamental categories. Number one is economic participation and opportunity. Number two is education and attainment. Number three is health and survival. And number fourth is political empowerment. And based upon these indicators, that they rank countries on the basis of the performance. Pakistan, unfortunately, has an overall current ranking of 144 out of 145 countries, with only war-ravaged Syria lagging behind it. Unfortunately, over the years, Pakistan has consistently been amongst the last 5 countries in its position in the Global Gender Gap Index. Now, when I am giving you a description of these indices, I'm not subscribing to them, but I'm just trying to tell you that at the macro level, this is how we measure whether women are being empowered or not, or whether the countries are working towards empowering their women or not. So, for example, Pakistan was in 2006, 112 out of 115. In 2011, it was 133 out of 135, almost in the last 5 spots. In individual categories, Pakistan seems to have the worst ranking in economic participation, which is 143 out of 145, whereas its best ranking is in political participation, and it sort of stands out within these developing countries, where it has a political standing of 87 out of 145 countries. One immediately needs to ask a question that if giving political rights to women, or having which ironically was also measured by their representation in the parliament and their voting behaviors, one needs to ask the question that why hasn't the increased political participation translated to achievement in, let's say, other fields? Because Pakistan does really poorly in not only economic participation, in which it is in the worst category, but also in educational attainment, in health and survival, in political empowerment. Other than Afghanistan in the region, Pakistan, even in health and survival, doesn't have any scores. Not that Bangladesh, India, and other countries are remarkably ahead of us. In fact, within the South Asian countries, Sri Lanka is the best performer in terms of that. And the other thing about empowerment is, which I'm going to later I'm jumping from here to there, is that in the face of these macro-based studies, there are certain smaller micro-qualitative-based studies. And ironically, in one of these studies that was conducted by SARC, women in Sri Lanka, who participated in those particular focus group discussions, did not feel that they were very empowered. Or in fact, they were saying that our position has worsened. And Sri Lanka, in terms of health and survival, comes number 1 in the ranking, which means that it has better health and survival chances for women than even the developed world. So number 1 ranking is very important. But women in Sri Lanka, in that smaller micro-based study done by SARC, Human Resource Development Center, published in 2015, women kept on questioning this. They said our rights are being taken away, we are not given enough role in political participation. On the other hand, women in Afghanistan, who had the worst statistics in the region, were sort of brimming with this kind of confidence that things were becoming better for them, and they were saying, no, we are allowed to go to the university, we are working and things are good for us. Probably also because it's a micro-based study and they conducted in Kabul University or something, we got these kind of confusing results.